What's going on, beautiful J4 family and community? I hope everyone is doing well, having a wonderful Sunday and Labor Day weekend. Hopefully, I'm not intruding upon your barbecue festivities, whatever that may be. Steak, chicken, vegetarian, mushrooms, whatever the case may be. My family and I are going to celebrate tomorrow. Have the kids come over, the family, granddad, and everybody. Set it out over here in the Jones family world. Hope everybody's doing very, very well. Just waiting for a couple of folks to come in. If you can hear the music, let me know. Let me know if it's too loud or too low, whatever the case may be. I'd like to get a sense of how that volume sounds on the other side of this screen. All right. So today's goal, beautiful family, is 3 subscribers. We have reached our viewership for those of you in the YouTube space as a content creator. One is to have fun and connect with beautiful people, meet folks, share some information that's on your spirit, your heart, your mind, but also to monetize. And so the format for monetizing, for those of you who are YouTubers, if you have curiosities about that, is over 4,000 watch hours in any given 12-month period. We're well above that. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening and YouTubing and Facebooking, whatever the case may be. But also 1,000 subscribers, 1,000 subscribers. We've been locked around that 626 space here. I had a subscriber today. Thank you to that beautiful individual. But the goal is to get to 1,000 eventually and continuing to put out important content in this parenting space. J4 Conversations is a channel where 2 fathers and 2 sons chop it up about competencies for young people. Also do some solo stuff here in the parenting space, but also certainly have been in more so last couple of months doing some things in the biracial world. So if you are a parent, in an interracial relationship or were in an interracial relationship and you have a beautiful son or daughter and you're looking for strategies or a community to ask questions, pose strategies that have been effective for you in terms of raising your beautiful children, we'd love to know what those strategies are. You know, there's a lot of interracial marriages. The numbers are increasing exponentially. And as a result of the increase, producing more and more babies. And the babies are becoming significant mass in terms of population. But the nuance, the uniqueness of a biracial kid is still something that is, still being meshed out a bit. Because a lot of times you'll have a monoracial parent, particularly in today's era. Let's say that's a white mother, and then you have a monoracial person of color. Let's say that's a black person, and they have grown up in a world that they know their cultural nuance, understanding, and life lived, but they produce children who will share both in this example, white culture and black culture, but inherently within themselves, they navigate a duality. They navigate a multiplicity. They navigate that internally within themselves in terms of self-talk and reflection. But they also manage that in terms of their peer groups when they go out into the public sphere and they engage the broader populace. And then identity dynamics are squarely placed in their lap and they have to navigate that. And so parents can't pull from their own experience to help the young people navigate that in very succinct kinds of ways. You know, all parents will pull from their own awareness, their experience with their mom and their dad to then raise their children. And interracial couples will certainly be able to do that in large sum, but there is a unique slice, a very relevant and critical slice in terms of their children's identity development, and that is navigating a duality, navigating a biraciality or a multiraciality. So thank you guys for coming in. Mulatto, what's good, brother? Hope you're well. Hope your world is well. Hope that you're doing well and continuing to be on your journey in terms of your mulatto growth and identity. All right. Mulatto says, I'd like to talk to you sometime next week concerning the significant mass criteria. Yep. Just hit me up on a text, email, whatever the case may be. Would love to chop it up. So Mulatto is referencing something called the 9 criteria that I came up with after discovering significant energy and interest in the biracial conversation in a way that was not familiar to my generation. And so one time I just decided to muse on it, just kind of muse on what would it actually take for a biracial community to assert itself as a singular or an independent identity. And one of the criteria was significant mass. If you looked at the percentage of biracial folks in my era, the earliest data set I saw was 1970, and it was 1%. 1% of human beings were considered biracial. You fast forward to today's 33.8 million, or roughly 10% of the populace. When you were 1%, you didn't have options. You kind of just isolated into yourself, or you lean towards, in my case, a blackness. But there was not enough robustness, at least in the Southwest where I came of age, to sort of join a community of folks who were identifying primarily culturally as biracial, monoracial, or mulatto. I, just for full transparency, I consider myself racially black and white. My mother's a European French woman from France. My dad is a Creole black cat from New Orleans by way of Gary, Indiana. And culturally, I identify as black. However, today, I'm seeing much more assertion in the identity space of biracial kids, and I can understand that logically because their experiences have been different, and the populace, what they see out in their sphere, what they see out in their world, is also growing. So thank you guys for joining in. Truly appreciate it. My name is AJ, the moderator. I'm one of 4 individuals. If you guys are willing and comfortable, love to know who you are. And also, if you are a monoracial parent raising a biracial kid, that'd be helpful to know. Or if you yourself are biracial, multi-generational, and just want that to be known. All right, so the goal, 3 subscribers and 10 likes. If you're in these boxes, hit that YouTube like. Subscriber is a bit more personal. That's certainly a personal choice, but if you find value in the content, please do that. Today's format, I'm going to pose to you 5 questions, all right? I'm then going to get your feedback, kind of what your thoughts are, the answers, and then I'm going to share the data. And then we'll open this thing up to see if there's any questions. I'll put the link up there at some point to see if there's any questions on the subject matter first and foremost, and then if there's other kinds of questions you want to ask in the multiracial, biracial space as an individual and or as a parent. All right, fair enough, beautiful family. All right, so this information is taken from the Pew Research Center. Right, this is a data that's extrapolated from the U.S. Census. There was about 22,000 individuals in this surveying, of which 1,500 would identify themselves as multiracial adults. It was released in 2015, so it is a little bit outdated, but I still think the information is somewhat helpful to share nonetheless. All right, so the first question I want to put out there for y'all to contemplate is this. What is the percentage of mixed race people who say they are multiracial? All right. What is the percentage of mixed race people who say they are multiracial? All right. So this means they are biracial, they are multi-generational, maybe 2 or more races. Okay. But how do they identify, let's say on the census or in communities when they're talking to their peers? Do they identify with a monoracial identity, or do they identify as biracial, multiracial? Again, to reiterate, if you were to ask me, almost all of my adult life, I would say, yeah, I acknowledge a biracial heritage. I acknowledge 2 monoracial parents, but culturally, I would say I was black. And that was kind of consistent with folks in my age set. I'm 54 years old, born in 1968. But today's generation is having a different kind of response. So I'd like to see some answers in here. If you have them, Mulatto, what do you think? Folks listening in, what percentage of mixed race people who say they are multiracial? What percentage? All right. Well, let's take a look at the data. So according to the Pew Research study, 4 in 10 have mixed race background and say they're multiracial. Does that surprise you? It surprises me, to have surveyed 1,500 or 22,000 people, and it's a comparison between the general population and those who would identify as 2 or more races. It was probably data was done in 2014. Perhaps they had to take some time and put it all together. But this is surprising me. Or Nicholas Jones doesn't surprise Nicholas. He says 25% would identify as multiracial. Okay, so 4 in 10. So in my generation, I could see that number making sense, or maybe even a little bit lower. But it surprises me. In this generation, I would think that number would have been higher. So this is what the data says. 4 in 10, percentage of adults with a background including 2 or more races who consider themselves multiracial. This means they are of 2 or more races, but they identify singularly with one race. Very interesting. So of all multiracial adults, 39%, hence the 4 in 10 number, identify themselves as multiracial. And then it breaks it down by the family configuration. Okay. So white Asian, which is interestingly a decreasing population in terms of interracial marriage. All interracial coupling is increasing with the exception of Asian. Asians are now marrying less interracially and more monoracially. But in terms of identifying as multiracial, Asians are at the top there. Those with the black-white configuration, my circumstances, 61% are identifying multiracial. So this is an aggregate of the total multiracial folks that were responded. 39% indicated that they were multiracial, as opposed to the remaining ones indicating that they were culturally singly identified. All right. White, black, American, Indian, 50%, black American, 30%. And then just to let you see it, one sec. And then white, American, Indian, 25%. So even though 25% is the lowest, they probably are the largest configuration of the 1,500, because if you look at the 2 or more races that have the highest percentage, it is white and American Indian. So they're probably skewing the data. So with the exception of that clustering, you see quite a few folks who are identifying multiracial. All right. Do you all find that interesting? Let's see if there's any comments here. Thank you, Nicholas. Appreciate your feedback. All right. So the next question I want to explore with you is, are multiracial adults more likely to have single race partners? Wow. What do you think? Are multicultural racial adults more likely to have single race partners? What do you think? For those of y'all joining in, we're doing a multiracial in America. We're using Pew Research data sets. 22,000 people were surveyed, of which 1,500 were 2 or more races. And we're making some comparisons here. We just took a look at 4 in 10 mixed race backgrounds say they're multiracial. That's largely shaped by the largest percentage of interracial marriages and children as a result are Native American and white. I don't know how they would identify culturally. I think significantly percentage of them identify as white. But when you break the data set down, white Asian, white black American Indian, and it presents itself there with the largest percentage being white Asian. All right. So let me see. Are more multiracial adults more likely to have single race partners? Who are the biracial folks dating? Who are they dating? Yes, more likely to have single race partner. Nicholas, up in here. Appreciate you, Nicholas. Love to know, are you a biracial person, multiracial, parent, whatever the case may be? Love to know a little bit more about you, Nicholas. All right. So we have our panelist has shared, or our chat box participant has shared. I'd like to talk. Let's take that off. All right. Are multiracial adults more likely to have single race partners? Let's check the data. All right. Multiracial adults are less likely to have single race partners. All right. So if you look at the general population, if you look at the population at large represented within these 22,000 people, 2% indicated having multiracial partners, and multiracial adults indicated that they had 12% single parents. Multiracial adults less likely to have single race partners. The general population was at 2%. However, multiracial adults were at 12%. 12%. So they were less likely to have single race partners. If you look at whites only, 92% had single race partners, and to where multicultural white, 67% had single race partners. If you look at black folks, 86% were single race partners, compared to multiracial black at 54%. Okay, at 54%. And then, just to remove that bottom there, if you look at Asian only, 64%. I don't quite know why they didn't give the duality there. But according to this, multiracial adults are less likely to have single race partners. So that's not surprising. That's not surprising. If you look at the journey and life lived and travels and traverse of social circles, educational institutions, career spaces, multiracial folks are coming across more and more multiracial folks. There's perhaps some initial inkling of connection based upon a biracialness or a multiracialness that they would have lived. I think they can certainly navigate through any unique cultural space, especially the two or three that they share. But the fact that they have this nuance, this dynamic of having to navigate multiple spaces, I think just that commonality alone might rise or raise a sense of increased greater connectivity, at least initially, right? At least initially, perhaps more so than monoracial culture, right? Cultures tend to segregate. Cultures tend to stay among themselves. They're in integrated spaces, but socially they tend to sort of kick it and hang out among themselves, as this data would reflect. But a multiracial person would have sort of a unique life lived that might give them a predisposition or an inclination to kind of reach out to folks who at least outwardly appear to be multiracial. And the more and more you have that happen, the more and more likely that can then advance to courtship, romance, and possibly a partnership. All right. What does Mulatto say? Mulatto says, I prefer mulatto women. I think they're the most beautiful women. All right. So mulatto is in this category, less likely to have single race partners. That's interesting. That's interesting. The reason I say it's interesting is because if they are less likely to have single race partners, then that means the percentage is going to increase of interracial marriages. And the data set would certainly affirm that, with the exception of the Asian community, which is saying something about the trajectory of the United States population. All the data sets say that the percentage of interracial is going to increase. That means biracial, mixed race babies are going to be born in proportionate numbers that I think is already challenging the historical racial configurations that tend to be the dominant, black, white, Hispanic, Native American, Asian American, right? And you have this budding community of biracial folks, both in the public space, private sector, entertainment, careers. And I think that's going to play itself out in, the next decade or so in ways that will be sort of befuddling to grandparents, in ways that'll be highly curious for young, for first parent relationships, but also in ways that'll be sort of normalized and unique for today's generation. All right. Nicholas, I'm just a black engineer in Houston. Growing up, black women told me that I act white and would marry a white woman. I'm looking to move to Europe. I like Slavic women. All right. So this brother's passport, brother. You ready to get on that plane? All right, brother. Good luck to you. Good luck to you in what you're doing. And thank you for coming over, brother. Maybe there's some racial nuances we could chop it up about. Should time permit and interest be there. All right. Magic Mulatto, how are you? Welcome, welcome. Yes, of course, mixed people would want to be with other mixed people. All right, that's what the data is sort of suggesting. All right, appreciate you guys being up in here. Let's throw up the next question. Number 3. Yeah, of course. No, that's the wrong one. Let's go back. I'm trying to get my technology game on, y'all. All right. What is the percentage of people under 18 that are multiracial? All right. What percentage of people under 18 are multiracial? If you look at the broader society, 33.8 million constitutes 10% in 2020 of biracial population. So let's use 10% as sort of our comparative number there. And if you look at 17% of all newlyweds in the last 2 years, 17% of all newlyweds are interracial. 17%. All right. So what do we think it is? What do y'all? Let me get a guess in here. Magic Mulatto, Nicholas, riding with me, Mulatto. What percentage of young children under the age of 18, meaning birth to 17 years old, do you think would consider themselves by birth configuration multiracial or biracial? Appreciate you guys joining me. All right. In the census data, younger Americans are most likely to be multiracial. And it breaks it out from 0 to 4 all the way to 65 plus. Magic Mulatto says 30%. Okay, this is a good psychological measurement. This was a 2015. I'm sure the percentages are higher now, but if you break it down by whatever year configuration, Nicholas says 40%. This is the demographic according to Pew Research. 22,000 surveyed, 1,500 were multiracial. But this was actually taken from in the census data. Okay, in the census data, percentage of age group in 2013 reported as 2 or more races. Okay, so if you look at the older generation, 65, it was 1%, which kind of goes back. That makes sense because back in my day, 1% of children, 1% of human beings were biracial. If you look at 40 to 64, kind of which is my age set, 2%. 25 to 39, I think that's your world, Mulatto, about 3%. 18 to 24, 4%. 5 to 7 years old was 5%, and 0 to 4 is actually 7%. So if you take 0 to 17, that translates, if the math is right, 12%. 12% of younger Americans would consider themselves multiracial. That is higher than the current 10%. And as the trend would suggest, the younger population as a whole is becoming more and more multiracial, more and more biracial or multi-generationally mixed. It's definitely growing a lot. Absolutely. All right. Hopefully y'all are finding these tidbits of facts interesting. The reason why I think it's important to share data is because anytime a community is attempting to say something about itself, especially if it's asserting some kind of new identity onto the landscape, it needs to be able to say something about itself. And oftentimes, which is one of the main functions of the U.S. Census, is to gather data across a number of variables and then to compare them. And by comparing them, you understand something about the health of a particular community. You got human beings, but then you break them down by gender and you can tell a story. You got human beings, and then you break them down by race and ethnicity, and you can tell a story. You break them down by educational attainment, economic status, and you can tell a story. And so the nation, it sets forth policy, it rearranges priorities based upon where it feels it needs to place its attention. And so if a biracial assertion is seeking to identify itself and to assert itself into the broader populace as something new, then it needs to be able to say something about itself. All right. And so data like this helps future projections. It also tells a story in the immediate, but it also provides reflection for future decision making. A lot of love. My first mind said like 13%, like how they say black people are 13% of the population, but there's definitely more, I believe. Okay. Thank you, Magic Mulatto. Appreciate you. All right. So there you have it. There you have it. Now, as I don't know if y'all can see my arrow, but as the numbers decrease as a snapshot of an immediate moment, if you were to then look at this 10 years from now, the 0 to 17 would then be in the 18 to 25 to 39 category, and you would begin to see these numbers just increasing as more and more babies are born. All right. So let's go to the next question. Question number 4 of 5. Hopefully I'll find this interesting. There's a delay in the response. I realize that. All right. Predominant political leanings of multiracial adults. All right. What are the predominant political leanings of multiracial adults? What do you think? Democratic, Republican, Independent, something else? Black Panther political party? All right, we got a couple of folks up in this box. I need y'all to kind of join with me. Join with the old man. What do y'all think are the political leanings of multiracial adults? What would you say? Democrat, Republican, Independent, or something else? What do you think? What do you think? Thank you guys for just joining us. We're musing on a couple of questions here around the dating selection process of multiracial folks. Right now, we're exploring the political affiliation, where they lean. Nicholas says Democratic. All right. Why would Nicholas say Democratic? Probably because I'm putting words into Nicholas's mouth. When you think biracial, you tend to think black, white. That is, you'll see in another screen here, the fastest growing interracial configuration. But if you look historically, I call the 1960s as the dividing decade between the modern and pre-modern era of biracialism. The 60s was just a decade of several legislative acts, Civil Rights Act, several laws, in terms of enforcing the 14th Amendment. And prior to 1960, the larger percentage of biracial children were produced by white men. Post 1960s, you do see biracial births, but the percentage largely was done by black men versus white men in the black-white kind of configuration. And so, because black folks largely align themselves as Democratic, one could think children at least inherit or pick up the values of their parents. And so, yeah, that is a logical assumption, Nicholas. I would actually agree. All right. What does the survey say? All right. If you look at the general public, the folks in this survey, many multiracial adults don't identify as Republican or Democrat. All right. So if you look at the general population versus multiracial adults, they say 37 compared to 35% of the general population, multiracial folks identify as Democrat. If you look at Republicans, the general population, 26% of them lean that way. And then of multiracial adults, 17%. Okay. But then you see an uptick in independent affiliation, 26% of the general population identifying as independent, and then 28% of multiracial adults identifying as independent, and then something else. I'm not quite sure what something else would be, but it assumes, or I'm assuming, maybe that is, you can read a whole lot into that too. No affiliation, no interest in it, not voting, or maybe there's some write-in kind of thought process there. Now, when you look at lean party identification as a whole, Democratic leaning, I guess if you're independent, which way do you lean? General population leaning 53% and multiracial leaning 57%, pretty close there. And then those that lean Republican are 41% compared to 37% for multiracial communities. All right, so let's take a little dip down in the data. All right. So white and American Indian adults are the only multiracial group that leans Republican. Interesting. Again, that white American Indian, if someone has that particular configuration, I'd love to chop with you. I'm wondering, are these two white presenting individuals, but one of them has some distant American Indian affiliation and connection, and they recognize that beautifully so, rightfully so. But that would certainly kind of talk about the data set we saw a little bit earlier about the folks who identify as multiracial versus don't, and what those percentages were. All right, so what do we have here? If you look at the two multicultural groups, white American and Indian, 53% Republican. If you look at white Asian, 60% Democratic. If you look at white Black American Indian, 72% Democratic. So Nicholas's answer is playing itself out here. If you look at white Black, 73% Democratic. If you look at Black American Indian, 89%. And then if you look at single race adults, white only, 41% Democratic, 55%, Asian only, 68% Democratic. And if you look at Black folks, you're looking at 92%. 92% of Black folks voting Democratic consistently. And so, yeah, it makes sense that those interracial configurations who have a Black parent might lean that way, at least initially. Okay, beautiful, very interesting. How you guys doing out there? Thank you guys so much. If you're just joining in, welcome. Our goal today is 3 subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, but you find value in the content, please consider doing that. And then definitely liking the show on YouTube. Appreciate you coming in. All right. We're going to get ready for our 5th and final question. And then I'll open it up to see if there's any commentary on the data set that's been shared. And then we'll see if there's anything beyond that might be on your mind and spirit that you'd like to process in this particular space. Okay. Y'all enjoying this music? I'm trying to add a little nuance here. Okay. Are multiracial adults more in favor of legalizing weed? Y'all some weed heads or what? What do we got? Hit the like button. We're on a campaign to grow this channel. Thank you, Mulatto. Truly appreciate you. We'll give that a little highlight. Hit the like button. We're on a campaign to grow this channel. Thank you guys so much. The channel, any YouTube content creator, which I'm, at the beginning of just trying to figure this technology out, but I'd like to, have some relevancy to parenting, particularly parenting Black and biracial children. My initial catalyst was the fact that in our community, 51% of babies are born to single parent homes, and that's a problem. And so I want to have conversation with young people, particularly young men, about intentionality in terms of child rearing, which is a process of identifying a mate, going through a courtship process, vetting each other out among your close networks and social circles, and then moving towards marriage, and then through planning, through after time together in a marital status, then producing a child, versus some of the potential impulsivity that happens in the broader society, where babies are made out of passion, midnight passion, and not family planning. There's a correlation between quality of life down the road. There's always exceptions, and single mothers and fathers who are doing a hell of a job, doing a wonderful job. But there's a correlation between quality of life across various variables for single kids, kids born in single parent homes versus those in two healthy functioning homes. And so it has a parent focus to it. But as more and more biracial kids are born as a result of more and more interracial experiences, and that percentage of that will likely be Black fathers and white mothers, as some of the data will show, the parenting of those children is critically important. All right. I'm 20% Native American, but culturally Black and just look Black. Right. All right. Beautiful. I do want to go, before we talk about whether or not y'all are weed heads, whatever the case may be. The numbers we talked about, 12% of people under the age of 17 were considered multiracial. If you were to look at African American young, the groups rank in the same order as for, let me say it this way. If you look at the aggregate data, there were white American Indian was 1.3 million. Okay, 1.3 million. White and Asian was 941,000, and American Indian 518,000, and white and some other race was 383,000. Okay. However, if you look at young adults were less likely than older adults to affiliate with either of the two major political parties. But if you look at younger adults, the groups that rank in the same order as for multiracial Americans, white and Black were 1.5 million, white and Asian 941,000. So if you look at just that 12%, if I'm not confusing the data here, the younger generation is largely more Black, white, biracial mix. Just wanted to throw that out there. All right. Good music, brother. All right. Imagine when I'm pro legal weed, I move to a state that has legalized weed. All right. The new Kevin Samuels. No, brother. Shoot. That brother will get more engagement in 20 years from now than I ever will. But that's at least from a marketer's perspective, he was a beast. He was a beast. And I think a lot of people sort of miss his presence, just whether it was for instructional value or just entertainment value. I know I used to watch on occasion and be like, dang, I miss this brother. And sorry for a tragic life lost, tragedy of a life lost too soon. I think once the dust settled, hopefully he's raised some questions and will lead to healthy dialogue among relationships. That seems to be very dominant in the space right now. That's not my lane, relationships. But I'd like to have a lane as what's produced from those relationships, which are babies. And we have to be very intentional as parents on how we're raising them. If you want some previous shows that talks about raising children, particularly boys, in intentional kinds of ways, please take a look at some of the earlier content there. All right. My husband smoked, but I don't want to have to worry about him getting locked up over a blunt. I feel you. Yeah, it's probably long overdue. Mulatto shouting out KS. All right. So let's see what the data says. What's the question? Are multiracial adults more in favor of legalizing weed? Let's see. I don't identify with being Democratic or Republican. I think it's dumb to base your whole identity on your political views. I think both sides have good values that I agree with and some that I don't. Yeah. So you would either fall in the independent group or there's some other group. All right. And the answer is, drum roll. All right. Yeah. Y'all biracials and multiracials, y'all like some weed. Y'all some weed heads. Ganja, chronic, broccoli, whatever the terminology is these days. All right. So they have 3 categories here, only for medical use. To get high on your own supply in the middle. It should not be legal. Okay. Moderate category. Yeah, moderate. Yeah. There was a data set on conservative, but I thought it was too many questions. Maybe I'll pull it up in another time. So Magic Mulatto's got a puff, pass. All right. So we have the general public, meaning the 22,000 is a sampling of the general public. 36% said for medical use, 38% said for use as you want to use, and 24% said should not be legal. Okay. But then when we extrapolate the multiracials, the biracials, the 2 or more folk, is what y'all said. 33% for medical use, 49% for personal use as you want to use it, 17% said keep it illegal. So as an aggregate, whatever the math is on that, 74% of folks in the general population said yes, either for medical or personal use, compared to multiracial, with 82% of you guys said pass, puff. All right. So again, just having a little fun here on a Sunday. I'm going to drop the link in. Should anybody want to come up and reflect on the 5 questions, I can put them up again if you need to. Or if you just have something else on your spirit and mind. We've got a little bit of time left, and we can definitely chop it up. So if you're interested in coming on the screen with me, just hit that, come on in the back, and we'll take a look. But yeah, this is where you guys are on marijuana. A lot of this is a result of the age set. Young folks tend to lean moderate or liberal. And if you look at views around marijuana, definitely there's a generational gap between older generations and younger generations. But as the multiracial, biracial group saw significant birth, coming out of the 60s and 70s, they're still young. And so their identity politics or their political politics or their social politics will tend to lean consistent with young folks. So as an aggregate, you'll tell a biracial, multiracial story, but that'll be skewed because the significant percentage of the population is going to be young. All right. They're going to be young. All right. Worry about if people smoke weed or not is a non-issue. Let's fix homelessness and focus on other things that matter. Right. So Mulatto is talking about, working on issues and causes. And a lot of times people will focus on things that they're connected to. And a lot of times that comes from whatever their dominant identity is. And their dominant identity then shapes things that they read about, things that they follow, that they focus on, that they study. And then in the study, they discover things, and they'll discover beauty. They'll discover high achievements, but then they'll also see problems. And it's initially through the identity dynamic, whatever the priority identity is, that shapes the macro look, the macro overarching understanding of it. But then as time goes and you become more and more immersed, you then dig into the minutia, the details of it. And it is in the details where you would discover inequity. And it's the inequity that becomes the action of culture. If biracial and multiracial is going to assert itself, at some point it will need to get past squabbling It would need to get past celebratorial kinds of gathering moments, and then what becomes the action of any kind of given culture. And well, from my lens, that is to solve problems that impact your community problematically. All right. The only way you can understand that is if you study yourself, if you understand your data set. All right. What do we have, Mulata? Love all this data and info. Where are the sources on this? Yep. So if you go into the YouTube description right after you hit like and subscribe, plug, you'll see it'll say source, and then there'll be a URL link. Okay. This is a pretty extensive study. It's multiple pages. This is just a sampling. If you want to dig a little further and find out more information about these comparisons between the general population and the multiracial adult population, feel free to do that. But the source is listed in the description of YouTube. All right. So just to recap, I don't see anyone coming up in this boxes. If you're not comfortable coming up in the box, but you want to put a question in the chat, feel free to do so, and I will take a look at it. All right. So the biracials are weed heads. That's what we learned here. White and American, the biracials, the multiracials tend to lean democratic for the most part, but are also more independent identifying than the general population. That the highest percentage of biracial across birth to 65 plus is 0 to 4. But if you look at the distinguished age of independence, so-called independence for children, that is 18 years old, they can sign legal documents, they can move and behave and be held accountable as adults in most instances. So 0 to 17 is 12%. 12%. Now, if we look at this, if you look at all the other age sets, 18 to 65, that's 4, 7, 9, 10. Actually, 0 to 17 is larger than all the remaining age sets in terms of a percentage. That's very interesting. But it lets you know how young the multiracial community is. Multiracial adults are less likely to have single race partners. If you look at black, white only, 86% of black folks tend to have single race partners, but multiracial with black included is at 54%. So multiracial folks are marrying other multiracial folks at higher percentages than monoracial folks. And then last but not least, 4 in 10 of multiracial children say they are multiracial. Okay, this is interesting. I wonder, as more advocacy, more education, as the population grows and raises its voice more, if this percentage will change. I imagine these identity dynamics in politics are how young people are navigating peer and social circles. As I talked about in the initial video that really brought attention to this channel, White Mothers and Their Biracial Black Sons, where we were talking about our journey into a blackness and kind of the fun of it, the quirky of it, and some of the challenge of it. Young folks responded and said, hey man, you know, some folks were saying biracial kids ain't black. Biracial folks were saying we ain't black, we're both. And I understand that you're recognizing and honoring both love sources. But this is interesting that only 4 out of 10 or 39% are claiming multiracial adults. As I mentioned, I do think this is skewed by the percentage of white American Indian, which is the largest numerical population, and they themselves tend to identify white and Republican as the data set suggested. But if you look at all the other groups, 33% black American Indian, white black American Indian 50%, white black 60%, and then white Asian 70%. So if you were to remove white American Indian out of the data set, I know that 39% would be much, much higher, which is just interesting. As someone who is biracial by birth, but culturally black, or at least that's how I came of age, this is all just fascinating and compelling to me. All right. Very interesting about people connecting to the issues of their dominant identity. That is so true. Yeah. You know, there's so many ways to be in the world, right? You know, if you look at macro, micro, right? Let me just take this off here. All right, we are at the musing part right now. if you look at macro, micro identity formation, so the first highest level is human, right? We're human. Then when you drop down there, you drop down in a number of ways, right? Whatever your priority is. But just to keep it in a geographical space, you then drop down to country. And then your country is largely shapes your identity. So where you're born into the world largely shapes your identity, which lets you know of the social construction. Humanness has consistencies. You can study that biologically, right? But after that, identity politics, or at least sociological, anthropological identity dynamics, are largely shaped by where you entered the world. And so countries then become a country of origin, and then that is articulated as nationality. Nationality or country is determined by the current political geo state of that. What is this capital, is economic system? What is this governance structure? Where does religion play or not play in that environment? And where is it in terms of resources, economics? Is it robust, first world, second world, third world? What is the military presence, right? Those all then shape identities factors. So if a country is largely religious, then religion will be a dominant kind of identity. If a country is largely homogenous, meaning the same race, then ethnicity becomes a subset that has more dominance and prominence. In countries that are diverse, such as the United States of America, race becomes dominant and prominent, and then race is a category, but the action, life lived, how you wake up and go to sleep, and how you move through it, that becomes then a culture. For certain cultures that have a connection to another country, particularly in biracialism or immigration patterns, then language might have a factor there. And so then once you have culture, you then, at least historically, you work from that in terms of trying to seek to improve. But as more and more younger people come and the identity conversation changes, you then have diversity within culture. And so now you see gender, trans, LGBTQI, and in this space of diversity within diversity, you have this uptick or this experience, this outward voice that's being raised by biracial and multiracial communities. And that's a function of time and birth rates. And then if you can just live an aesthetic cultural life, you can live an entertainment cultural life, or particularly when you're thinking about how to raise your children, you then want to think about a cultural depth, a cultural life that comes through examination and what you want to maintain in terms of transitioning to your children. What do you want to maintain from the culture, and what do you want to remove and not replicate and teach in your children, right? That's where you get into breaking cycles. All right. I mainly identify with mixed. The main issues that affect us is people in the U.S. is people are very ignorant and uninformed about us and our history, and we get discriminated against. I mainly identify with mixed. The main issue that affects us is people are very ignorant and uninformed about us and our history, and we get discriminated against. Okay, I'm gonna come back to that. We don't even know our own history, right? Right. So there's they don't know about us, but then you make a beautiful confession here that we don't even know our own history. And not to put words in your mouth, is that mixed history or Black history or mixed history as an extension of Black history, right? As you guys continue to think about who your heroes and sheroes are, I've heard some conversation about extrapolating them, historical biracial, multiracial figures from the Black history story. I think that's very compelling. I think that's wonderful conversation and fodder for debate. Can you remove them and claim them independent of a Blackness when what they fought, lived for, and became of notoriety for was done within a Black context? That probably needs to be another show unto itself. Magic Malata says, love it. Yes, exactly. Reclaiming biracial people in history. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. I think you can certainly, let's say you're talking to your children and you're providing them examples of historical people that sort of make up their hue and their melanin content. You can certainly point to history and have ample and robust example, but to then add to the sentence as something distinctive from Blackness, wow, I'd have to process that. Mulatto. We do have mulatto history. It's just that it's been hid into Black history, right? Is it of Black history, mulatto, or is it hidden in Black history? Is it Black history? Is it of Black history, or is it distinct from Black history? That's a powerful question. Y'all chime in on that. Let's flirt with it a little bit. Is mulatto history or biracial history? Is it hidden into Blackness? Is it a part of Blackness? Is it something independent of Blackness? Or as a culture affirms itself in a modern era, going forward, it becomes their own heroes, but the mulatto biracial folks of yore were of a Blackness. I don't know. Interesting. Thank you guys for joining me so much. I'm going to close out on Mulatto's question, Magic Mulatto's question about history, right? Thank you guys so much for rocking with me. As you guys are getting ready to exit out, definitely check out the next video. And again, if you see value in the content as a biracial mixed race person or a parent raising biracial children, definitely consider becoming a part of the community. At its most infant level, that would be to like this particular show, but at its highest level would be to subscribe, and then at its even highest level would be to go through the videos, examine it, listen to it, take what's relevant for you from it in raising your children or living your life going forward, and then use it as a complementary tool or a space of feedback and resource. We don't claim expertise, we just claim life lived as biracial folks from the late 60s up into the modern era. All right. Very interesting, amazing stream. Love you, brother. Appreciate you, sister. Definitely appreciate you. Mad growth to your channel as well. I think it's part of Black history, but we have our own story as well as that is different than the Black history. Yeah. No doubt. Black history is human history. Talk to him, Nicholas. All right. So let's go here. I mainly identify. Where's your question? Did I lose it? I mainly identify with mixed. The main issue that affects us, people are very ignorant and uninformed about us and our history, and we get discriminated against. Okay. So I would say, as you talked about, even further not knowing your own history, there's very little encouragement in the broader society to know history other than passing K-12 requirements for a high school diploma, a GED, or to meet admissions criteria for college. Beyond that, there's very little incentive to study history other than an enthusiast who finds passion in the subject matter, right? And so most people, even though they claim a culture, they don't really know the culture, not incentivized to understand the culture, yet they're largely rooted in it. They find identity and affirmation, and they can get triggered once it's under assault or attack. Okay. There's no real incentive to understand it in depth, yet people live it outwardly almost all the time. And you have communities of people who are identifying across multiple racial, cultural kind of categories, but none of them really know much about it. They don't understand its history, and understanding history helps you explain a current moment. If you want to look at a data set and understand why it is in this particular present moment, well, you're going to have to go back and study history and understand how it evolved and moved up to this particular moment in time. People simply examine moments without considering the momentum of history, and they are typically going at each other when they're younger. And when younger people are battling each other from racial or colorism, they're not doing it with really any cultural understanding. They're simply responding to how they feel and how they're affected in an immediate moment. And so they're not examining history, and so there's no opportunity for cultural connectivity. They're not examining cause and effect. They're not examining um, um, patterns of geographical clustering. They're not examining the currency and cachet of historical rights movements, civil rights, resistance, fighting for certain human dignity and rights. They're not understanding that, because they're just living in a modern moment without any historical kind of context, and they're interpreting it in this immediate moment. They're interpreting it in this immediate moment, and they're doing it in this YouTube space, absent any intergenerational checks and balances. There's no uncle in the conversation. There's no granddad, grandma, mama that can set the babies down together, the young people together, and sort of talk this thing out. And so there's no calming voice. There's no caring voice that's in the process, right? And you just got people that are going at each other, and there's no end, and they just keep saying salacious, controversial things, and it just adds fire and adds fire and adds fire, and you just have this powder keg explosion that's occurring when young people are bantering and debating and technologically fighting each other, particularly around racialized subject matter. And then you throw in relationships, you throw in reputation, you throw in testosterone, you throw in bravado, and it's just a powder keg. It's just a powder keg. But out of this powder keg, there's still some truth. You know, the 9 criteria attempts to talk about that. But if the numbers are warranting a biracial assertion, as I've said countless times, it's an amazing anthropological, sociological observation. But if you're going to break from a maternal African or a maternal blackness, do so as gracefully as possible, and just see it as an extension of a baton into a new culture who, once the chronicles of history are told, will undeniably have to acknowledge a black cultural parental entity that birthed them one way or the other. I just hate to see the battling that's going on. All right. Let's go. Mulatto, appreciate your content, brother. Thumbs up. Thank you, man. So true. We need elders. Yeah. Y'all need older people who have life lived. They can speak balance. They can, the one thing about age, people call it wisdom, but what it is foresight. They've lived a life of a few more decades, and they can look back when they were in your age set, and they can tell a hindsight story. They can tell a story because they've lived some semblance, although it's unique with the advent of this internet. They've lived some semblance of it, and they can provide some insight to where a young person sort of making decisions in the now, absent the foresight, they're just kind of winging it in many instances. That's understandable, but I would say anything of substance, longevity, and legitimacy is typically the outcome of balance between older, middle, and young generation. The young generation cannot be denied its place in history. Almost all significant movements of mass included young voices, to include civil rights and then the most recent racial unrest around George Floyd. These were young voices drawing attention and changing corporate America, higher education, business, nonprofits. Young people cannot be denied their impact. But there's also something else can't be denied. Young people are impulsivity. Violence is in their toolkit. Reputation destruction is in their toolkit. And they'll bring a flamethrower to a barbecue in some instances. And where that balance can be set is with middle elders and elders. All right, beautiful family. We are up on the 1 hour. Again, thank you guys so much for rocking with me. I'm going to put up my email. If there's ever a content or something you want to explore and chop with offline, I'd be happy to, we can make the introduction via email and then maybe go from there. Would love to, kind of chop. Again, those of you in this biracial identity formation space, if there's anything relevant I can share beyond what I'm doing here in the video, that would be welcomed. But more to the core audience is moms and dads raising biracial children. If you want to talk offline about things you're contending with, identity formation dynamics, what your children might be experiencing or will experience kind of going forward. In addition to whatever the content here is, I'll be available to you for an initial sort of private consult or conversation if that would be of any value to you. Beautiful family. Again, our goal today was 3 subscribers. I hope to see it. And a good number of likes. We have some good numbers in here. Thank you guys so much. On behalf of J4 Conversations, love, love, love. Let me get my 4 in here. On behalf of J4 Conversations, love, love, love.